The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the Instant Info Systems and XMedius webinar focused on high availability and DR solutions breaking away from the collective. We're very excited to have you here with us today, and I am very excited to welcome our key speakers, Carol Waldron, Director of Strategic Channels from XMedius, and Rich Bott, Director of Pre-Sales Engineering from XMedius. I am Julie Fergulia, VP of Marketing, and I'm very happy to be joined by Fernando Lopez, Sales Engineer at Instant Info Systems. So we have a great deal of technical knowledge with us today, and we're very much looking forward to delivering hopefully a very useful and informative presentation for you. Some quick housekeeping before we begin. You should see on your screen a Q&A panel. Feel free to write in your questions at any time during the presentation. And at the end of the presentation, we will get to as many of these as time allows. But please rest assured, if we run out of time and we don't have an opportunity to answer your specific questions, someone from Instant Info Systems will reach out to you directly and make sure you get the information that you need. So real quick before we begin, I wanted to give you an overview of IIS and XMedius. Many of you already know that IIS has been a predominant fax expert for over 20 years. Not only do we have a great depth of expertise in a broad range of fax technologies, but now as an independent provider of fax solutions, we also provide expertise in a broad range of market-leading solutions, specifically XMedius. So we are thrilled to be partnered with XMedius, and this company is such an incredible innovator. They were pioneers in the fax over IP space, and today they continue to deliver new and sophisticated functionality to their full spectrum of fax solutions. So together, the partnership between IIS and XMedius means that you benefit from one of the industry's most sophisticated and robust fax solutions, backed by the unparalleled technical services and support that Instant Info Systems provides. So today, our focus is on a topic that is on everyone's mind, business continuity. Many of you heard about the cyber attack on Sony about 18 months ago, and just this month, Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital also came under a major cyber attack. You can read more about these on our blog at instantinfosystems.com. But the interesting thing about these security breaches is that in the wake of crippled information and communication systems, both Sony and Hollywood Presbyterian turned to fax to maintain their operations and their mission-critical communications. For Sony, that meant relying on fax to communicate between their employees and partners. And for Hollywood Presbyterian, fax saved the day by allowing them to continue transmitting critical medical records and patient documents via fax. The lesson here is that fax should be an integral part of your business continuity plans. And few organizations know more about how to implement a streamlined, well-architected, and cost-effective solution for high availability and disaster recovery than XMedius. So today, I am thrilled to have our friends at XMedius provide us with a detailed overview of the XMedius fax architecture and the many advantages that it offers over the traditional collective architecture of WriteFax. And for those of you that are currently using WriteFax, not to worry. We're also going to take some time today to talk about the programs and processes that we have in place to make replacing WriteFax as seamless and painless as possible. So without further ado, I'm very happy to turn it over to my friend Carol Waldron, Director of Strategic Channels at XMedius. Carol.
Hey, Julie, thank you so much to Instant Info for having us here today. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Instant Info and XMediusFAX webinar, Breaking Away from the Collective. My name is Carol Waldron. I'm the Director of Strategic Channels here at XMedius. I also have a teammate, Rich Bott, on the line with us. Rich is our Director of Pre-Sales Engineering, and he'll be helping to field any questions you have throughout today's presentation. So our agenda, today's agenda. I've been keeping an eye on the attendees as you've been rolling in, and I recognize a lot of folks from the webinar we conducted with Instant Info a couple of months ago, and I'm aware that the vast majority of you are current WriteFax customers, and I think about half of you are running multiple WriteFax servers, presumably in a collective. But I'm also seeing a lot of names on the list, a lot of attendees, folks who weren't with us previously, and for whom this is your first exposure to XMediusFAX. So I don't want to leave anyone in the dust. So I'm therefore going to start with a quick intro. of who we are and what XMediusFAX is at a fundamental level. And from there, I want to jump into the more advanced breaking away from the collective. We're going to take a deeper dive into the primary purpose of this webinar to discuss the RightFax Collective, their version of HANDR, and how XMediusFAX offers it differently. We'll take a look at the advanced features available in multi-XMedius server deployments, and then we'll take a look at some new offerings to help with migrating from one to the other. So again, we'll be covering a lot in a little amount of time, so let's just jump right into it. So, a quick moment to explain who we are, what XMediusFAX is at a fundamental level, and most importantly, where our sweet spot is in the market. Our company name today is XMedius Solutions, Inc. Our flagship product is called XMediusFAX. We were previously owned by a very large European conglomerate, Sagemcom. Well, last year we were acquired. Our group broke away from Sagem, and we're now majority owned by a US-based private investment firm called Stone Caliber. So when we were acquired, we just rebranded ourselves as XMedius Solutions. We still have the same management team. We still have the same products our customers have loved for years. But now we've got some autonomy and the ability to react more quickly to market trends. So we're the group in Stone's portfolio responsible for all fax-related technologies. We have an on-premise fax server that we'll be discussing today. We do have a cloud fax offering also. You can call Instant Info if interested in getting more info about that. So truth be known, we've been in the U.S. market for more than 20 years with a variety of products under a variety of brand names. But it was in the 2003-ish timeframe that we started recognizing a couple of really significant trends in the market and decided at that time to readjust our product strategy accordingly. So that was right around the time that the voice over IP adoption rates were skyrocketing. And that was also when virtualization, specifically VM, became prevalent in the market. And at that time, all of our fax solutions were like everyone else's. We required physical fax cards or modems or ATAs. And given where the market was going, we decided those hardware dependencies were just cumbersome. Our offerings, frankly, just weren't elegant. So we went back to the drawing board. We totally rewrote our code from scratch. And in doing so, we wrote and bundled into our software our own T38 protocol stack. And herein lies a major differentiator, not just between us and RightFax, but between us and all the other fax server products on the market. And I'll explain more about that. For those of you who aren't familiar with the term T38, it's essentially the most reliable protocol used to run faxes over a VoIP network. So think of it as an insulation layer that wraps itself around a fax packet and protects it from loss. What's unique about our product is that, again, we wrote our own T38 stack and included it in our software, meaning we don't have any third-party dependencies in order to fax enable your infrastructure. I suspect a lot of you are still using Brook Trout fax cards with your current fax server, or maybe you have a Cisco call manager with ATAs hanging off gateways, or maybe you're using a Brook Trout Dialogic, their SR140 software, which is basically a T38 stack. We don't need any of that. We are truly a single source, software-only fax solution. We got completely away from those dependencies. And truthfully, we will continue to do so. We have, for lack of a better expression, a very one-throat-to-choke philosophy that we've adopted here. You know, we want to handle the R&D and the tech support end-to-end, whether we're talking about the application itself or the mechanisms used to connect to your telephony. The last thing you want to hear as a customer, if you call support, for instance, is that we need to put you on hold to call a third-party vendor or Dialogic. That's when the finger pointing ensues. Or you install a Windows update, and lo and behold, your RDTs, your remote dock transports, stop working, or your fax cards are no longer supported. We have control end-to-end of our product, and as such, our customer satisfaction rates are in the 99% range. Very, very strong. So I don't want to overlook the fact that, like most fax servers, XMediusFAX can fax-enable desktop applications. We can send and receive faxes from email, from a browser-based interface. We can fax enable printers, back-end systems, so on and so forth. We do all that, but today we're focusing on survivability options, right? So why is this T38 stack I just mentioned so important when we're talking about things like HA and DR and redundancy? Let's use this as a jumping off point for today's primary topic, breaking away from the RightFax collective. So, in order to understand how and why our design is superior, we have to first take a look at our primary competitor's offering for what they call HA. Let's look here at the RightFax collective. The two blue boxes in the center are representative of two RightFax servers. I suspect, again, looking at the attendee list, this is a very common deployment model for the vast majority of you on today's call. So, the two fax servers in the center, we'll call them fax server 1 and fax server 2. You'll notice the dotted line connecting the two. It's dotted because the databases of those two servers cannot talk. They simply cannot replicate in real time. Instead, RightFax has kind of a unique offering. They require several things in their HA design. Number one, you need to deploy an optional module on each of the two servers called a shared services module. I've marked those here as SSM on each of the two servers. Number two, you have to offload your fax images to a SAN or a NAS, again noted here at the top as a peripheral server. Number three, you need to offload your database records, your metadata, to an external SQL server, which most commonly I've found is clustered with, yet again, another SQL server. Those are represented by the ovals below the fax servers. And number four, more often than not, RightFax recommends that in larger deployments, you offload your fax boards or your SR140 drivers, what they call RDTs, remote dock transports, to, yes sir, yet again, additional peripheral servers. All this leads to the question of why. You know, it's lunacy in this day and age to conservatively require 2, more likely 5 to 8 peripheral servers to support a fax application. It's costly, and there are so many single possible points of failure that it's counterintuitive to call it HA at all. It frankly looks a lot more like a workaround for an aging product than a feature set. The solution? Well, in an XMediusFAX universe, here's what an HA deployment looks like. Fax server 1, fax server 2, period. You'll notice that I've inserted a solid line this time connecting the two, and that's because our databases have the ability to replicate in real time. We don't require SQL. We don't require a NAS or a SAN. In our HA, the channels are shared, the services are shared, the servers are truly active twins, and in the event of a failure of any kind on one server, the other fully functioning picks up the workload until the malfunctioning server resumes its normal workload. This is representative of our 4 nines uptime enterprise class high availability solution. So let's take a deeper dive into that, both HA and DR, frankly. I want to look at both. But before moving on, I want to make sure that we're clear on definitions, because traversing the field, folks often tell me, hey, I've got DR in place, and after talking to them, we come to find out they've just loaded their fax server on a VM, and therefore they have a backup image available in the event of a failure. Well, okay, that might mean DR to some, but to us, HA and DR take on much more significant meanings and are much more sophisticated. So high availability in our universe means multiple fax servers are performing like and common functions in tandem with each other to ensure there are no periods of non-performance. Period. Meaning, multiple fax servers are constantly working together to ensure uptimes. All the servers have access to all, not select, all real-time data, and that data is replicated across all the servers in an HA solution. In the event of a failure on one, the other picks up the failing workload. And when the non-functioning server comes back up, all the data that has been generated is immediately replicated, and the servers resume their normal workloads. Okay, so specific to XMedius and HA now. High availability, truthfully, has been available in our product almost since our inception. It's because of an engagement with a large fax service provider who came to us and said they wanted to use our software on the back end and essentially offer fax services to their customers, but we needed to develop a 4-9 uptime solution. And ultimately, it's that engagement to which we reacted that ultimately landed us with XMediusFAX HA today. So it's important to recognize that in an HA environment, we're working with essentially two mirrored twins. XMedius doesn't just replicate fax images and fax histories, but also all the configuration information, settings, rights, restrictions. Either server can therefore process client connections or telephony connections. Okay? Now, we use a heartbeat between the two servers to constantly monitor the health of those two servers. And note, very important here, we require a 10 millisecond or less round trip. We need an incredibly fast connection. So, although it seems counterintuitive here because, again, both servers are working in tandem, it seems a little counterintuitive to call one a primary and the other a secondary. But we do denote one as the master, if you will. It's the fax manager. It's the brain, for lack of a better expression. If the primary experiences a failure of any kind, the secondary assumes the role of the primary. And, of course, vice versa. If the secondary fails, the primary will also pick up the workload. When the failed server comes back up, all the information is automatically instantly replicated on the failed server, and it resumes the role of processing. So, a feature that's pretty neat and exclusive to XMediusFAX, first, load balancing. Well, what does that mean? Well, not only can XMediusFAX load balance workloads, sending and receiving, but we also load balance all the internal services. So no one server is therefore taxed. Everything is shared. Note, we don't require any kind of cluster software or anything like that in order to do this. And another pretty slick feature involved in our HA strategy has to do with floating channels. And again, something fairly unique to us. In a common deployment, let's say you need a total of 24 concurrent fax channels at any given time. Most commonly, we would deploy 12 channels on server 1, 12 channels on server 2. You can round robin the workloads between the two, so no one server has to handle the full workload. We disperse the workloads. But in the event of a failure, the failed channels automatically float over to the other fully functioning server, allowing the total system to operate at full capacity at all times. And, of course, when the failed server comes up, the channels float back over, and you're still running at full capacity, but in a distributed workload. So again, this is something fairly unique to XMediusFAX, the ability to float channels back and forth in that kind of environment. So, the benefits of HA. Again, I want to make sure we're clear here that the data replication is synchronous. It's a mirrored configuration. It's automatic replication, okay? You've got the ability to configure the replication. There are load balancing features, floating channels, no single point of failure. This is truly our 4-9 uptime solution. And again, the benefit for those of you using some of the older, more legacy products in the market is that we don't require any kind of SQL, any kind of SAN or NAS or remote dock transports. Those all become obsolete in an XMediusFAX universe. So, moving on from HA, I think it's worth talking a little about DR and what it means in our universe as well, which is uniquely different than an HA scenario. It's important to recognize that DR in our universe only performs live system functions when the main system fails. So it looks much more like a hot spare out in the field. Now, you might ask yourself, well, your HA is so cool and slick, why would we want DR? Well, it's designed for a different set of requirements. It's ultimately designed in the event of a total, utter, catastrophic failure with regards to the primary. Disaster recovery is usually geographically dispersed, meaning if your primary site is in New York, you might want to put a DR server out in California, as an example. And again, DR in our universe is asynchronous replication. It looks much more like a lazy sync. And the speed of replication will vary according to the bandwidth available on the network. So again, why would you want DR versus HA? Well, a lot of customers came to us and said, you know, here's the thing. 10 millisecond round trip is pretty quick. We don't have the network required to do it. Well, this is designed to make the best of low band, high latency intermittent connections. You can offload the data with X frequency as you choose in a lazy sync fashion across a WAN connection, an internet connection, and likewise too, one of the nice features about this is that the systems don't necessarily need to be truly mirrored, like in an HA. An example, a customer of ours with an office in Chicago, also with an office in New York, said to us, you know, here's the thing, we really don't need HA. We don't need to replicate all the fax images in the database records. We don't need it that sophisticated, but in the event something happens to the fax server, we darn well want to make sure that our users in both locations can still send and receive. That's the most important thing. So in a DR environment, again, things don't need to be 100% mirrored. You can choose what configurations are mirrored and what options are available in the event of a failure. So there too, again, it takes advantage of maybe a low bandwidth type of environment. So the benefits of DR, you might think it's kind of funny to say active-passive is a benefit, but again it is. In low bandwidth environments, you can choose with what frequency and with what data you push out. Right? It takes advantage of low bandwidth utilization. Again, you've got the option of configuring exactly what gets replicated. And just as important, you've got the flexibility to determine what does not get replicated. So I'm looking in the chat panel, and funny enough, there's already a question about this. So nice segue into the next slide. The question is, can you use HA and DR together? And the simple answer is absolutely yes. And in fact, it's a really common deployment model for our customers. What you see here in my very crude drawing are a pair of HA servers doing true HA to each other and then offloading with X frequency to a DR site in a remote location. Very, very common. Folks might deploy the HA pair in a common data center and then just offload the mission-critical fax applications to a DR site in a remote location. Okay, so we've got a good understanding of HA and DR and what they mean both independent and combined in an XMedius universe. So I have to kind of stop myself here and go a little anecdotal on you to explain some of the exciting new things happening here at XMediusFAX. Probably within the last 12 months, maybe the last 6 months, we've been receiving an increasingly large number of calls from the RightFax community, both the customers and the partners. It's really like nothing we've ever seen. Folks are starting to investigate options for a variety of different reasons. In response to those calls and the floodgates, we decided to put together a focus group, okay? We put together and assembled a group of 25 of what I would consider to be some of the bigger RightFax partners out, or excuse me, RightFax customers in the field. These are enterprise class customers, folks running 96 channels or more. They're running in a collective. They've fax-enabled desktop applications. They've also maybe fax-enabled back-end applications. We brought all these people together in a focus group to find out if we're on the right track or find out if we're filling a gap or a need in the market. And over several sessions, both live and via WebEx, we displayed our technology. And we specifically showed folks our HA and DR story and how it works. And overwhelmingly, we were met with great feedback. People were thrilled. So many of them said, gosh, this is what RightFax, should have done years ago. This is what we were hoping RightFax would do. You have got an awesome, really compelling story. And frankly, in 2 cases, we actually got a round of applause. So we thought, hey, this is great. We're on the right track. We're developing products that the market needs. Good stuff. Well, over the course of the following few weeks, something really odd happened. Those folks who met with us, who said they loved us, everything's great, kind of disappeared. They stopped having conversations. They didn't necessarily run out and buy our technology, and we thought, well, help us out. What did we do wrong here? So we reinitiated conversations with a lot of those folks, and through the course of those conversations, we had a light bulb moment. That's the only thing I can call it. There was one gentleman who pulled me aside and said it best. He said, Carol, the end result you've developed is awesome. Your technology is slick, but you totally missed the boat and you forgot to develop a path to get us there. Aha. And that's when the light bulb went off. And that's when we started addressing the real-world concerns of a RightFax customer who wants to come over to our gear. So overwhelmingly, in soliciting that feedback, there were two concerns that arose. Number one, the RightFax data that still exists on the RightFax server and fax-enabling back-end applications. So let me take each of those in respective order and explain how we've addressed each should you choose to move forward with the XMedius solution. So in talking to these RightFax customers, they said to me, Carol, we need to bring that RightFax database over to XMediusFAX. Come heck or high water, it's got to come with me. Now, prior to these conversations, my canned answer to those folks was, well, just keep your RightFax server in maintenance mode over here, and if the user needs to find a fax, the data's still there, no problem. Well, it came quickly to my attention that the need to retrieve historic faxes is much greater to folks who use RightFax than maybe with other products. That it's not an anomaly, it's a really common occurrence for users to say, hey, I need to pull a fax from 3 years ago. And for them to go to multiple data sources, RightFax and XMedius both back and forth, would be really cumbersome. And to boot, let's not overlook the fact that at a time when you're trying to retire physical servers, it's totally counterintuitive to keep RightFax launched off to the side. So we said, okay, got it, loud and clear. We headed for the R&D labs and ultimately designed and released at midnight last night the XMediusFAX RightFax database migration tool. We're really excited about this. As the name implies, it's an optional module that allows you to migrate your RightFax database to an XMediusFAX database. We can port over both the images and the metadata associated with faxes. So we're thrilled to be able to offer this to the community who migrates over from one to the other with us. Now, there are a couple of considerations. Number one, you need to be running the RightFax 10.x platform. Truth be known, the RightFax 10x release was the first release that was truly 100% SQL under the hood. Even though RightFax, the 9s and the 8 versions, they looked very SQL-y, truth be known, there were still a lot of hooks in those back to the old proprietary Raymond database that existed in that product for years and years. So when we went into the QA labs, there was just enough risk and just enough flukiness in working with those older versions of RightFax that we didn't feel it wise. We felt that we might compromise data in creating a migration tool that supports those. So again, we exclusively support the RightFax 10.x platform. The good news is that, again, we're joined by one of the world's premier RightFax experts in InstantInfo today. If you are a RightFax customer using an older version, just contact InstantInfo and have them upgrade you to a more current. Easy enough. Now, the other consideration with this module has to do with a module RightFax released at the time of 10.x, and that's the encryption module. As the name implies, it encrypts fax images. And if you deployed it, congratulations, you got your money's worth. It encrypted the images, and there's nothing we can do with it. We did take a serious look at what it would take to essentially write a decrypt tool. But truthfully, it only took us a couple hours at looking at these images to realize that we're talking about, you know, a Tim Cook FBI escapade here. It would take thousands of man-hours to try and decrypt. So unfortunately, for those of you running the encryption module, there's nothing we can do to assist. If there's good news, we don't think this module is very prolific in the market, so we don't think it will affect very many of you. So during those focus groups, a second concern arose overwhelmingly with the vast majority of the RightFax folks with whom we spoke, and it has to do with production fax-enabling back-end systems. What we discovered is that fax-enabling back-end systems in a RightFax universe is very, very common. Maybe the RightFax community uses FCLs, the RightFax facsimile command language, to fax-enable, I don't know, an ERP system, Oracle, SAP. Maybe there are healthcare customers out there who are using RightFax in tandem with Epic, McKesson, Allscript. Believe it or not, we had some customers who still used RightFax commands to automatically fax enable mainframes and AS400s. We ran into some of those folks. And again, my canned response prior to these meetings was, well, we can do all the same exact things. we can offer production fax. We have our own set of codes, commands. Just replace those WriteFax commands embedded in the output stream from those systems with XMediusFAX commands, and you'll be good to go. Cricket. Here too, I was met with silence from these customers who said, Carol, you don't get it. It didn't just take us weeks. In some cases, it took us months to configure these back-end systems to properly send the data embedded with these codes to the WriteFax server to get it to work. We are not going through that again, and you've got to figure out how to use these WriteFax commands. So ultimately, that's what we did. So here too, tonight, we're releasing the XMediusFAX WriteFax Integration Converter. The sole purpose of this is to essentially map the WriteFax command language that fax enables back-end systems and maps it to like commands in XMediusFAX. The benefit here is that you don't need to modify the output coming off your back-end systems in order to fax enable them with XMediusFAX. All we need to do is redirect the output to an XMediusFAX queue or a folder that we pull, and again, we will handle the automatic replacement of like-for-like codes, period. So again, no manipulation to those outputs coming off your back-end systems, redirect it to XMedius, and we'll take it from there. So all things considered, those two products ultimately have helped us put together a very clear full migration path for you should you choose to move from one to the next. Number one, we always recommend a scope call with our good friends at InstantInfo and ourselves. We need to take a look at what you're doing today and what you'd like to do in a perfect world. Design a system before we touch anything. From there, most commonly, we deploy XMedius server number one. Get it up and running. Do the basics, right? Kick off real-time LDAP lookups to AD. Get your users, your work group set up. Maybe get some of that desktop faxing going. Install the print-to-fax driver. Send and receive faxes from email, from our browser-based interface. It's at that point we kick in with the WriteFax database migration tool. That's the point at which we will want to migrate your old data over into the intelligent admin structure within XMediusFAX. And if necessary there, this is where the WriteFax integration converter comes in. Let's take a look at your back-end systems and make sure we can redirect the output to an XMedius queue instead of WriteFax. So once everything is up and fully functioning, that's when we deploy XMedius server number two. We'll talk to you about HA, DR, both. What do you need to do in a perfect world? Let's bring that second, maybe third servers up and replicate all the data to that second server. And from there, of course, we're very fortunate to have partnered with InstantInfo Systems in that combined, we offer our customers both heavy-duty user and administrative training. You know, we aren't the kind of shop, we don't drop software and run. We're going to walk in lockstep with you throughout this process to make sure that your migration from point A to point B is a success. From there, go live. So on that note, I realize I've gone a little bit over, and I thank everyone for hanging in. As I mentioned, some of those modules we just released at midnight, and there was absolutely no way we were going to conduct this webinar without mentioning those. So again, thank you for hanging in for an extra 5 minutes while we blew through that. And I want to open it up now for Q&A. And Julie and Mark, I think you guys are monitoring the chat session. And Rich and Fernando, I know you're in the background too. Does it look like we have a good number of questions that we want to address?
We do. First of all, Carol, thank you so much. That was absolutely packed with amazing information, and I really appreciate the great insight into the work that went into creating the solution, particularly for those users who were thinking about moving off of WriteFax. So thank you very, very much. We have a ton of questions that have rolled in, and we will try to get through as many of these as we can. And as I mentioned at the beginning, please rest assured if we do not get to your question today, not to worry, we will reach out to you directly and make sure you get the information that you need. So let me start here. I'm looking through our question queue. I think this one probably a good question for you, Carol or Rich. What about MSMQ? Is it required?
Ooh, I'm going to toss that one to Rich. Rich, MSMQ, talk to us.
So MSMQ was a application that WriteFax uses for implementing the fax management services, for a better way to put it. And XMediusFAX does not use that at all. So we have our own method, our own fax manager, and we do all of the replication and management of the services and things ourselves. So that is a unit that does not have to be deployed with an XMedius solution.
Great. I think this is a follow-up. What about the image directory?
The image directory, that's actually a good question, because what typically gets recommended in a WriteFax solution is SAN or a NAS that's a replicated directory store of the images themselves, so that the replication takes place by the image store, so that they still only have one directory to go to write to. And the way that XMedius works is we actually keep data on both servers. So we have image directories on the server itself, so that if either one of those servers goes down, they have access to those faxes. And we have some organizations that want to take that a little bit further and use a SAN or a NAS for their structure. We can, by all means, work with that scenario, but it is not a required scenario from our standpoint. So you can be comfortable that the image directory that's on the server itself is completely replicated over between the two systems. But if you do have that need to push that information off to another location, by all means, we can accommodate that as necessary on a corporate decision.
Great. Thanks, Rich. Next question. What type of expertise does IIS have to migrate customers from WriteFax to XMediusFAX? Fernando, I know that you probably are in a great position to take this one.
Absolutely, and that, knowing the fax server world for such a long time, we've become familiar and accustomed to the requirements that people have. So we're best equipped to handle these transitions and also to help them achieve what they want in the new system. So XMediusFAX presented something really great in disaster recovery and high availability, and then now added feature of the migration tool to move them into that. Should be even a simpler task, but we have a large breadth of expertise in that as well.
Great, thank you. Here's actually a follow-up question. How about WriteFax appliance customers and moving them to XMediusFAX?
When you say appliance, I think we're probably referring to what at one time were the Castell fax servers. Unfortunately, that's a different database structure, and there is no migration path from point A to point B at this time.
All right, thank you for that. Let's see, let's keep moving here. If I decide to have your solution, no cloud-based, what is the hardware requirements?
Okay, so the hardware requirements for hardware requirements for XMediusFAX are they're actually pretty simple. We require a Windows OS. We have a lot of third-party pieces that we do use that we go through on the install, but we really just need either a physical server or a virtual server with a Windows OS operating system. And if we are going to deploy in a high available solution, then you just need a ping time between the two servers of 10 milliseconds or less. For DR scenarios, those two systems can be as far apart as you want them, and we'll just base it upon the connections between your system as to what data gets replicated.
Perfect, thank you. Here's a related question actually regarding hardware requirements. How many channels do I need on my system to guarantee that I always have 24 channels available?
This is an interesting one as well, a very good question, because when we look at solutions throughout the years, when you're dealing with a solution that puts out multiple doc transports like WriteFax, where they have the telephony on a system and it's talking to the telephony, if that unit goes down, then you lose the channels associated with that particular unit. So many times, if you need to have 24 channels up all the time, you would have to put 48 channels into play, or you might need to put in 36 channels and do 12, 12, and 12 across 3 of them. So if any one went out, you were able to handle the amount of traffic necessary. We've done a little bit differently. With our HA solution, we can actually run 24 channels as a total solution. So if you need 24 channels running all the time, you simply buy a 24 channel solution. what happens is we run 12 on one server and 12 on the other, but at any time, those channels can float to the other server. So if server A goes down, those 12 channels float over, and the second server handles the total 24 channels. Because your telephony system is typically set up as a round robin between the two servers for delivery of the calls, there's no changes on the telephony side needed during that type of period. So we'll just go from being able to take 12 simultaneous connections to 24 simultaneous connections as soon as that failover takes place. And when the failover is finished and that server is brought back online, it'll automatically load balance that back out and go back to the 12 and 12 solution for load balancing.
Great. Thank you, Rich. I am looking at the time, and we are just about out of time. I am going to take one more question here, and then, again, we will follow up with everyone else directly. What is the industry standard or best practice for testing your disaster recovery system? Rich, do you want to try?
Yeah, that's a great question because, you know, there's no set way of, you know, doing a disaster recovery test because the application itself, yes, there are some things that you're going to have to do to test the application side, but most of your disaster recovery is also going to include your telephony. It's going to include other applications that are running on your network. So it really takes somebody like an IIS to give you that expertise in the marketplace to help you plan that out. And, you know, IIS is a great resource for doing something like that to plan out a full disaster recovery solution and testing plan.
Fernando, do you want to chime in? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I was going to say that. And we see a lot of these requests come in all the time of how do we accomplish this and what do we need to watch out for. And we've seen a tremendous amount of scenarios where if they're not all the same. And so knowing that they're not all the same, we need to understand with each customer what their requirements are, and then you know, move them over to that, and we can provide scenarios and also best practices for each scenario that we've come across, including custom scenarios.
Perfect. Thank you, Fernando. We are just about 45 minutes past the hour, so we are going to wrap this up, and I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. I hope you found this information useful and informative, and a very special thanks to Carol Waldron. Great presentation, and thank you so much to Rich Bott and Fernando Lopez for your technical expertise. And that concludes our webinar today on XMediusFAX and breaking away from the collective. You can see our contact information on the screen. If you have any additional questions, of course, we encourage you to reach out to us. And for those of you whose questions we didn't have time to get to today, rest assured we will be reaching out to you as well. So thank you again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.